Stop scrolling for just a moment. Between August 4th and August 8th, 2026, something unusual is unfolding, not a natural disaster, not a government announcement, and not the kind of event you'll see breaking across every news channel. In fact, that's exactly what makes it so interesting. Because the biggest shifts in history rarely begin with loud headlines. They begin in silence, hidden inside ordinary days, while almost everyone is looking somewhere else. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this week may be remembered very differently than most people expect. So don't skip ahead, because the final piece connects everything. Imagine waking up tomorrow. Everything looks completely normal. People go to work, kids go to school, the news talks about politics, sports, and celebrities. But beneath all that, something unusual is quietly unfolding. Not a disaster, not an alien invasion, not the end of the world. Just a series of tiny events, so subtle that 99.99% of people will completely ignore them. Yet history has shown us the biggest changes rarely begin with loud explosions. They begin with silence. Between August 4th and August 8th, 2026, there's a pattern emerging, and if you're paying attention, you might notice it before everyone else. Stay until the end, because the final clue changes the way you'll look at this entire week. Have you ever looked back at a moment in history and wondered, how did nobody see it coming? The truth is, they couldn't. Because the biggest shifts rarely arrive with sirens or breaking news alerts. They happen quietly, hidden inside ordinary days that seem completely forgettable. Think about it. Before the internet changed the world, it was just a research project. Before smartphones became part of everyday life, most people believed they were unnecessary. Even artificial intelligence spent years developing behind the scenes before it suddenly became part of everyday conversations. The pattern never really changes. History doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. That's why the period between August 4th and August 8th isn't about one dramatic event. It's about understanding how change usually works. Around the world, engineers are improving software, scientists are publishing new research, businesses are testing ideas, and governments are making decisions that may not seem important today, but could influence the future over time. Most of these developments won't make the evening news. Most people will never hear about them, and that's exactly the point. Real transformation often begins long before anyone recognizes it. By the time everyone is talking about a breakthrough, the groundwork has usually been laid months or even years earlier. So instead of asking, "What's the big event?" ask a different question. What small changes are happening today that people might only understand years from now? Because those are the moments worth paying attention to, not because they're dramatic, but because they're easy to miss. And sometimes the future doesn't begin with a single headline. It begins with a quiet week that almost everyone overlooks. 2. Here's something fascinating about the human brain. We're naturally drawn to noise. A breaking news alert grabs our attention in seconds. A viral social media post spreads around the world in minutes. A major crisis dominates every conversation almost instantly. But quiet progress, that barely gets noticed. Our minds are wired to react to what's urgent, not necessarily to what's important. That's why we often confuse attention with significance. Just because something is everywhere in the headlines doesn't mean it will matter 5 years from now. And just because something receives almost no attention doesn't mean it isn't shaping the future. Think about how many groundbreaking ideas started in complete obscurity. Small research teams working late into the night, a startup operating from a tiny office, an engineer solving a problem that most people don't even know exists. At the time, those stories seem ordinary. Years later, they become history. The truth is, The future is usually built behind closed doors long before it becomes visible to the public. While millions of people are distracted by today's trends, thousands of innovators are quietly creating tomorrow's reality. Most people never see that process. Why? Because it isn't entertaining. Progress is often slow. It's filled with experiments, setbacks, revisions, and countless small improvements. Those moments rarely go viral, but over time, those tiny improvements begin to stack on top of one another. Then suddenly, what looked impossible yesterday becomes completely normal. That's exactly how massive change happens. Not all at once, one small step after another. And by the time the average person notices, they often feel like everything changed overnight. In reality, it didn't. They simply weren't watching closely enough. So as this week unfolds, don't focus only on the loudest stories. Pay attention to the quiet ones. Notice the small breakthroughs, the subtle shifts, and the conversations happening outside the spotlight. Because history has a habit of rewarding the people who recognize patterns before they become obvious. Maybe that's the real difference between those who are surprised by the future and those who are prepared for it. 3. Now let's connect the dots. Take a moment and think about your life just 10 years ago. How did you communicate with friends? How did you shop? How did you learn something new? How did you navigate to a place you'd never been before? Chances are, almost every answer is different today. Not because one giant invention appeared overnight, but because thousands of small improvements slowly became part of everyday life. That's the pattern. Real transformation doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens through tiny changes that quietly build on one another until they become impossible to ignore. Think about online banking. At first, many people didn't trust it. Today, millions manage their finances with just a few taps. Think about video calls. They were once considered unreliable and awkward. Now they're a normal part of business, education, and family life across the globe. Every major shift follows the same path. First, a few people experiment with something new. Then, early adopters begin using it. Eventually, it reaches a tipping point where it suddenly feels like everyone is doing it. But by then, the change has already happened. The interesting part is that we're living through another one of those transitions right now. Artificial intelligence continues to improve. Medical research keeps pushing new boundaries. Space exploration is opening doors that seemed impossible just a generation ago. Clean energy technologies continue evolving. Automation is changing the way industries operate. Individually, these developments may seem disconnected, but together they reveal a larger pattern. Human progress isn't slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating. And that creates an unusual challenge. Our minds evolved to notice gradual change, but today's world is changing faster than ever before. That's why many people feel like the future is arriving all at once. In reality, they've simply missed the small steps that led to it. Now think about this week. Somewhere, a scientist is making a discovery. A programmer is solving a problem. A small company is testing an idea. A student is learning a skill that could define the next decade. None of those moments will trend online. Most won't appear in tomorrow's headlines. Yet one of them could become the foundation of something millions of people rely on in the future. That's why patterns matter more than predictions. Predictions often fail because the future is uncertain. Patterns, however, reveal how change usually unfolds. And if history has taught us anything, it's this. The people who recognize patterns early don't have a crystal ball. They simply pay attention to what everyone else dismisses as ordinary. So as August 4th through August 8th quietly passes by, don't ask whether this week will change the world overnight. Ask a better question. What invisible seeds are being planted today that the world won't fully recognize until years from now? because that's where history usually begins, not in the spotlight, but in the background where almost nobody is looking. 4. So what does all of this really mean? Is this week secretly different from every other week? Probably not. And that's exactly the lesson. The biggest mistake people make is believing that life changes because of one dramatic moment, one headline, one invention, one speech, one announcement. But if you look closely at history, you'll notice something very different. Life changes because of consistency, because of small actions repeated over time. A single drop of water doesn't carve through solid rock. Millions of drops do. The same is true for progress. Every breakthrough you admire today is built on countless hours of invisible effort. Every successful company started with an idea that almost nobody believed in. Every revolutionary technology went through years of trial, failure, adjustment, and improvement before it reached the public. We usually celebrate the finish line. We rarely see the journey. That's why it often feels like successful people appeared out of nowhere. But they didn't. They were simply building while everyone else was distracted. And maybe that's the most valuable pattern of all. The people who seem to stay ahead aren't necessarily smarter. They aren't always luckier. Very often, they're just paying attention to the right things. Instead of chasing every distraction, they focus on long-term trends. Instead of asking what's popular today, they ask what will still matter 5 years from now. Instead of reacting to every headline, they spend more time learning than worrying. That mindset creates opportunities, not because it predicts the future with perfect accuracy, but because it prepares for change before change becomes obvious. Now imagine 2 people standing in the exact same place today. Both have access to the same information, both see the same news, both experience the same week. One person scrolls past everything without a second thought. The other becomes curious. They start asking better questions. What skills are becoming more valuable? What industries are quietly evolving? What habits will still benefit me years from now? Those questions may seem simple, but over time, they lead to completely different lives. Because attention is one of the most valuable resources you have. Where you choose to place it shapes what you notice. What you notice shapes what you learn. What you learn influences the decisions you make, and your decisions shape your future. That's why this isn't really a story about August 4th through August 8th. It's a story about perspective, about learning to notice what most people overlook, about understanding that the future isn't something that suddenly appears one morning. It's something that's constantly being built, one decision, one discovery, and one improvement at a time. So as this week quietly unfolds, don't waste energy searching for a mysterious event that's guaranteed to change everything. Instead, pay attention to the small signals. Read a little deeper. Stay curious. Question assumptions. Learn something new. Because the greatest advantage isn't knowing the future. It's developing the habit of recognizing meaningful patterns while they're still easy to ignore. History has shown that extraordinary outcomes often begin with ordinary moments, and perhaps the most important moments are the ones that don't look important at all, until years later when everyone finally realizes what they almost missed. So, between August 4th and August 8th, 2026, don't expect fireworks, expect whispers. Watch what people ignore. Watch what quietly improves. Watch the technologies, the ideas, and the conversations that receive almost no attention. Because one day, someone will ask, when did everything start changing? And you'll remember, it didn't happen overnight. It happened during ordinary days that almost everyone overlooked. Maybe this is one of those weeks. If you enjoyed this journey into hidden patterns, subscribe, because sometimes The quietest stories become the biggest chapters in history. And remember, the future doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives one unnoticed day at a time.